Hello, it's Jay Cheatham. I'm the CEO of Pantheon. Welcome to our webinar. I'm going to put on my Great Bear Pantheon Talitha hat for the presentation, and then I'm going to turn off my camera because we've got a lot of people that are going to talk today. Today I'll lead in. Then also on the webinar you can see we have Bob Rosenthal, Justin Hondris. Bob's our technical director. Was one of the founders of Great Bear. Justin's our financial director. Also on the webinar, we've got Michael Duncan. He's our vice president of operations and engineering. And Michael delivered what can only be described as a great well. When you look at the caliper on this well, the caliper log looks like railroad tracks. And as a result of that, you will hear multiple people today talking about the great data set that we were able to get out of this well. And part of that is a result of the great drilling that was done. Roger Young is going to follow me. He's from our partner at eSize, and he will give you an update on what we told you last October and how things have changed since then with the drilling of the Talitha A. Ed Duncan, one of the other founders of Great Bear and a consultant to the company, will take you through the Baker Hughes AHS VAS data. And we also have Jerry Nichols, one of our consultants, on the webinar. So that's our disclaimer. Here's what you're going to see. I introduce the team. Why Alaska? We'll talk about our acreage position, give you an overview of Talitha A, the Ed's introduction to VAS, and then a wrap up. So you guys, if you've been on any of our presentations before, you have seen this. This is simply the north slope of Alaska. You can see our acreage position outlined in red. We have 160,000 acres, most of it contiguous. You can see in my screen, it's kind of yellow, our two unit blocks of about 70,000 acres. The Alcade well is the most northern well near the highway. Almost due south of that is the Pipeline State well, and just to the west of that is our Talitha A location. The well off to the south and west was the Merlin well that was drilling in the later period of the winter up on the north slope. You can see our acreage related to Prudhoe Bay and Kuparuk, two of the largest. Prudhoe Bay's easily the largest field in North America. Kuparuk is the second largest. So we're here, and we're in the Valley of the Giants, and location is super important, and you will hear that because being close to the infrastructure, and that's the Dalton Highway and the Trans-Alaska Pipeline, reduces your development cost. It also allows for summer drilling if you can get the permit from the state, and we have one permit, or we have one agreement with the state to drill from a gravel pad at Alcade, and we believe we could also drill our shelf margin deltaic from the highway. What have we done with Talitha A? We've de-risked this program. We believe we've proven up a billion barrels recoverable. And just to give you some context, we spudded this well seeking to confirm 4 target horizons to drill and test. And that was a very, very aggressive program. Most companies on the north slope will drill and test one zone, or maybe not even test, possibly just get a fluid sample out of one zone. So most winter wells are drilled for a single objective. We had a very aggressive program to target 4 horizons and to test 4 horizons. We spudded this well seeking to confirm that we had a 2,000-foot hydrocarbon column. You will see that we've confirmed that we have 3,700 feet of column. As I mentioned, we had a pre-drill estimate of 1 billion barrels potential. We will show you the data behind that, and there will be upward revisions coming. So we've de-risked our acreage. We've increased our confidence in all of these zones. Now, the Kuparuk, we spent a lot of time in the Kuparuk zone, and we got a lot of people asking, why did you do that? We will show you the reasons. The Kuparuk encountered some specific issues. It was found to be what's known as oil wet, as opposed to a water wet reservoir, and that has to do with what fluid is around the sand grains. It was also an overpressured reservoir. And overpressure is your friend as long as you know in advance that you have it. It allows you to have higher initial well rates. Typically, you will have higher recoveries from an overpressured reservoir, but it is not your friend if you discover it after the fact, which is what we did. So I mentioned, and the shallower zones do not exhibit this characteristic. And we have an excellent wellbore that's cased now all the way from top to bottom. Our external experts at AHS have confirmed 5 target horizons. We started out with 4. And our drilling cost 1/3 less than our original budget. That's good news, and that will carry forward to all of our future operations. And we're going to show you the potential that we have at Talitha. So a little more on the Kuparuk well. On the Talitha A well. So we set our intermediate casing string at 9726. We drilled out of that and drilled to TD, ran our logs, and we had wanted to do an open hole test. That was a time-saving measure. The Kuparuk was actually our third target. The shelf margin was the number 1 target. The basin floor fan was the second target. The Kuparuk was actually our tertiary target. And to save time, because you never know in advance in a drilling season how long it will last, we decided to plan this well as an open hole test in the Kuparuk. As we all know, that's where our problems started. We had a failure of our original test unit. We attempted to run the liner. That was unsuccessful. We ultimately sidetracked, perforated, and that's when we found we had an overpressured situation. And we've described the issues that we had with that. We had to go up to very high fluid weights to control the well, and then we were able to complete the well. So our acreage portfolio, we will show you why we bought the acreage that we have in the last 2 lease sales. We have strategically refined our acreage over the last 2 years. We now have 9 and 10-year tenure over our 160,000 mostly contiguous acres. And we have a dominant acreage position in the very, very high potential. We call it the Theta West play that we will show you, that is the basin floor fan play. In the future, our post-drill analysis is already underway. We will have management resource upgrades. Our farm-out process will recommence. But before we leave that, I want to just talk about alkane, because we haven't talked about alkane very much. The lower drilling costs will lead across into everything we do in the future. And this has a big impact on Alkaid. Also, the increasing oil prices that we've seen over the past several months has a large impact on Alkaid. The Lee Keeling report net present value for Alkaid was $595 million at a $55 realized price, held flat. With lower drilling costs, that will increase by over $200 million. So Alkaid has now the potential to deliver $800 million of net present value to the company, and we have 100% of that. So back to the Kuparuk. Why did we persevere with the Kuparuk? And you'll see the well logs, and so you'll understand that. But it is a 340 million barrel target with those exceptional logs, and off the scale, as Bob likes to say, gas chromatograph readings. Now, we had a series of operational issues that caused delays, and as I mentioned, we had the early decision to do an open hole test on it. But we had to persevere because the Kuparuk is a well-known reservoir, productive reservoir on the North Slope. And with that over 300 million barrel potential, it had also at our location had the potential to deliver commercial flow rates that would be well recognized and possible reserves. And once the decision is made to move up hole, you're not able to return. It was simply too good a target to let go of and not fully test. And we found that it is oil wet. That is a specific challenge to deal with an oil wet reservoir, but there are firms that are experts in dealing with reservoirs that are, quote, oil wettability. This is only the second one that I know of in my career, so they are rare, and you treat them differently than what are known as water wet reservoirs. And that's different, of course, than having a reservoir that's full of water. So it was simply too good a target to let go of, and the VAS analysis confirmed that and the presence of light oil. So I'm going to turn it over to Roger. I'm going to turn off my microphone and take it away, Roger.
All right, microphone's on. Thanks, Jay. We're going to go through the petrophysical part of the logs, but I wanted to start first with where we were last October when we last presented to you. Last October, as you remember, we presented that the pipeline well was the key well to the whole play, and that the pipeline well had very poor log quality. That was because the caliper log showed it was very washed out. So all the logs run through there are highly affected by this poor caliper. This required a lot of correcting of the logs so that we can make the logs tie the seismic data, of which we have a really great seismic data set. But without the logs to help us understand what the seismic is responding to, we're kind of stuck. So we spent a lot of time working the pipeline wells, correcting the logs, tying it to the seismic, correcting the logs, tying it to the seismic. And in the end, what we ended up with was the conclusion that we have 2,000 feet of hydrocarbons in this abandoned borehole drilled in 1988 that no one else is worried about. Not only that, we also said that this 2,000 feet intersected numerous giant oil fields. Well, that's quite a statement to say. And a year ago, we were trying to get partners in to come in and drill this well with us. And we would show the partners this. And they would say, well, that's all very interesting. Let's check the data out. And they would go through the data and they would look at the logs and they would analyze the logs and they would come away with the conclusion that, wow, This is really tough. These logs are just not good enough to be able to support that that's what's going on. See, this is where science and art meet each other in one of the areas in this industry. You have to have those things tied together to actually make sense out of it all. So what happened? Well, here's the log analysis from the Talitha well. Right here is the Decker D. That's the sealing surface. That's the regional seal of this whole area. From the Decker D on down is where the hydrocarbon zones start. We have 3 shelf margin deltaic zones, 1, 2, 3. We've got 2 slope fans. We've got an upper basin floor fan, which we haven't even mentioned yet. We've got the huge basin floor fan, and we've got the Kuparuk. That's over 3,000, as Jay said, 3,700 feet of hydrocarbon section that we've encountered in this well. Now what I'm going to do is go quickly through each of these zones, and then we're going to go through in more detail each of the zones. Here's the Kuparuk, and you can see why we liked it so much. There's a resistivity profile. Nice oil sand, nice blocky sand, 50, 60 feet thick. Great, that you can see why we stuck to that. Moving up hole, here's a basin floor fan. We have over 600 feet of section in a very laminated zone, totally expected. The thickness is thicker than we thought. The sand shell ratio is better than we thought, but nice zone. Go up to the slope fans. We were saying we hope to get 1. We found 2. And then the 3 lobes of the shelf margin deltaics. Now, before we go through all this again, I want to turn it over to Ed Duncan, who's going to explain the volatile analysis data set that we have, because the understanding of this, together with the log data and the seismic data we have, is key to understanding how all the pieces of the puzzle go together. Ed?
Thank you, Roger. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for attending the webinar. My name is Ed Duncan. I'm going to take you through a volatile analysis project that was run by a strategic partner of Baker Hughes called Advanced Hydrocarbon Stratigraphy. And volatile analysis in the oil and gas industry is relatively new compared to the age of the industry in general. It's certainly innovative compared to traditional well logging, mud logging, and well site observations during drilling. It's built on the back of mass spectrometry. I don't know how many of you are familiar with mass spectrometry, but it sounds like it might be a new technology. In fact, it's not. It was invented in 1912 by a British physicist, a Nobel laureate, in fact, who was also the gentleman that discovered the electron. That's in fact the basis or the primary reason for his Nobel Prize in 1906. If we jump forward, literally 100 years to well, not quite 100 years, to 1985, the founder of AHS, Mike Smith, was working as a research chemist for Amoco in fact in the North Sea. Mike proposed, and Amoco funded. They built the first mass spec based laboratory, well site laboratory, to analyze drill cuttings in real time for volatiles. What Mike recognized was that there's a tremendous phase change in drill cuttings between the reservoir and the surface. That's normal. Same thing as when you open up a can of soft drink. It's liquid in the can. You pop the top, and you get a lot of fizz and a lot of bubble. So that's the same kind of process taking place. The mass spectrometer that Mike built uses what is called a cryogenic trap at super low pressure. In fact, 1 billionth of an atmosphere. You can imagine what that is from a vacuum perspective, and super cold to keep the volatiles, the oils in the cuttings from changing phase. We want to get a look at them. The other thing Mike realized, which is really I think the genius in the methodology, is that the process of drilling a well grinds up rock at the bottom. That's self-evident, right? The fact that we're at 10,000 feet, there's a tremendous amount of confining pressure on the rock, and that affects the nature of the hydrocarbons or the fluids that are held in those rocks. When we liberate those rocks with the bit and bring them to the surface, there's a massive pressure change. Most of the hydrocarbons that we see in the reservoir change quite a lot on the way to the surface. Mike realized that within the cuttings, as small as the grains of the cuttings might be, there were even smaller grains aggregated together. And within the context and the construct of those aggregate grain pieces were small pores and fractures that were filled with the native fluid from the reservoir. And understanding how to look at those and describe those in detail was really the magic behind Mike's invention. And that was the mass spectrometer. He could look at, and now we can look at the chemistry of the fluids in the cuttings at a molecular and atomic scale. So we can see in great detail what actually is in the reservoir. Let's look at some of the results of what we have. Right after I show you the picture in the upper right-hand corner, it says well cutting sampling, sealed at well vessels, and traditional bag sample. That's a picture of the toolkit that we have access to with Mike's methodology, with the AHS volatiles analysis. That small brass tube with the caliper pointing at it is literally a few centimeters long and about a half centimeter in diameter. That is a sealed at well site sample. As soon as the drill cuttings make it to surface, they are a very small scoop of the sample is placed in that vessel and sealed. Additional, more traditional samples of scoop off the shaker, dried and examined by the well site geologists and mud loggers. Very traditional. That technology hasn't changed for over 100 years. It's preserved in a bag for additional analysis down the road. The example of that type of sample is on the paper filter you see in the lower portion of the picture. Those two different types of samples are fundamental to the analytical methodology that we're going to talk through today. If you look at the screen, you'll see a series of colored columns. On the far left-hand side, the red dashes in depth going down the slide are sample locations. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of samples taken in this well from the very shallow depths all the way to TD. In the analysis that we had the AHS guys do, there were 416 samples in total across the 3,700 feet of strata in the section. The important thing to remember here is this is a completely independent review of the drill cuttings and, in fact, the well results. We did not have any interaction with the lab team while they were doing their evaluation, other than making sure that the samples got sent to them. They were given no pre-drill presentation. They didn't have the logs while drilling or any presentation of what we thought was happening in the well, either pre-drill, while the well was drilling, or in fact for a good while after the well was finished. So I think it's a very, very important aspect of this evaluation to know that it's independent. Now to the data. Columns 1 and 2 on the left-hand side, the light green and dark green columns, represent the light green are the sealed at well samples. This is oil volume by sample. The scale is less important, but it is to recognize that all of the samples below the Decker D, from the Decker D top seal shale that Roger just described all the way to TD, every sample had oil in it. Every one. The volume of oil in column 1 is then compared to the volume of oil at the traditionally bagged sample set, and that's column 2. you can see that the change in oil volume between sealed at well and bag sample is a reflection of the volatile nature of the oils in the cuttings. Oil sitting at the surface, atmospheric conditions relative to reservoir evaporates. It's gone. It disappears. So when you see a big change between sealed at well and bag samples, that's a clear indication of mobility. These oils are light, they're volatile, and they're mobile. That's a very, very, very good sign from a reservoir quality perspective that you're seeing producible liquids. And that's the third column. Up and down this well, from the Decker D to TD, we see highly mobile oil. And it's light. Mike in his lab predicted 40 API oil before we had the geochemistry done. After the geochemistry was done, the oil sample from the Kuparuk was done by GeoMark Labs in Houston. It's 42.3 API. They nailed the API well in advance of us. That's a tremendous thing. In fact, this was at this stage when we were getting some periodic updates. It all seemed a little magic. In fact, they were pulling things out of the rocks that were absolutely stunning for us and very, very useful, obviously. The fourth column over is water volume, the water volume trend. And this is indicating the water volume trend is trending downward as we get deeper in the well. That's illustrating the increase in oil saturation with depth, a very, very important aspect of the well evaluation, and a good, very, very good thing. As we head down towards the Kuparuk and the basin floor fan, saturations are increasing. The middle column, the light blue, is hydrophobic character. And this really speaks back to the introductory comments that Jay made with regard to wettability. Often misused terms, oil wet and water wet. You'll hear people describe an oil reservoir as being oil wet, an aquifer or a very low saturation reservoir as being water wet. That's very likely to be incorrect terminology. What wettability is, as Jay described the fluid in that has the affinity to the grains, to the actual rock fabric of the reservoir. In the case of this well, we see a transition as we go down the borehole from the Decker D to the HRZ top seal above the Kuparuk. The transition from water wet to oil wet, and that flows through to relative permeability. The preferred fluid flow in a water wet reservoir is oil. The oil flows freely. In an oil wet reservoir, it's just the opposite. Water flows more freely. So that's an important thing to keep in mind as we advance through our evaluation in the post-well evaluation of the Kuparuk in particular. The next three color columns, the light purple, dark blue, purple, and then the orange, speak to prediction of API gravity. We've already talked through that we know we have light oil up and down the section, but the gasoline range, don't be frightened of gasoline range. Those are terms of in geochemistry for a certain size or number of carbon molecules in a hydrocarbon molecule. Paraffins versus naphthenes. Paraffins are straight chain, naphthenes are cyclic. This speaks to oil quality, and it flows through to the orange column, which is their prediction of API gravity in this borehole. Again, in advance of the geochemistry actually illustrating this point. This is mid-30s to low 40s API gravity from top to bottom. Fantastic quality oil. Let's look at what I consider game-changing results. Okay, I've already stated that every sample below the Decker D shale had oil. This speaks to the extraordinary nature of the petroleum systems within which we are working and exploiting. We knew that petroleum systems on the North Slope are good. Hundreds of billions of barrels of oil in place across the North Slope. What we're seeing in our project with the source rock, the HRZ or GRZ source rock sitting immediately at the base of our zones of interest, is that we are seeing a fantastic level of charge. of oil charge out of that source rock into these rocks. Again, every sample below the Decker D had oil. That's an incredible thing to be able to say, and an incredible thing actually to experience as a team in exploiting this section. The transition to wettability is real. Okay, it's important that we recognize that as we go down the well through the HRZ, we transition from from water wet to oil wet reservoirs. That's new data. That new data will be incorporated into future well planning, drilling, completion, and testing planning. That is a certainty. And the fact that we have light oil is going to be a bonus for all of us when we get into calculating flow rates and also the commercial paradigm. That light oil is more valuable than heavy oil on the North Slope for sure.
And just quick, the oil wettability revelation in the Kuparuk we learned on Thursday evening last week. So it was not any data that we had in advance. And as we've said, you treat oil wet reservoirs differently than water wet reservoirs.
Absolutely, Jay. We can't emphasize that enough, really. A part of every well is drilled, even wells that are development wells in large fields in the Gulf of Mexico where there are tens and tens of wells around you. Every well you learn something. And this is a situation where we learned a tremendous amount about this section in general, but in particular, below the HRZ, top seal and source rock, the Kuparuk section, being oil wet is entirely new data and overpressure, entirely new data, on the North Slope and in this area. Lastly, next to the last slide, actually, I'm going to show you. We asked Mike Smith, the founder of AHS and the inventor of this methodology, pick your favorite zones in the well. Now, mind you, we've 3,700 feet of oil-bearing section in this well from the Decker D down. It's a stunning amount of oil, for sure. And every reservoir bearing interval, every predicted oil bearing reservoir interval that we had going into the well is there, plus. Okay? The bars, the black outline bars on this log, are the highlighted zones of advanced hydrocarbon strats favorites. These include all of our pre-drill oil targets, plus the new play, the slope fan plays in the middle, Roger's already pointed to. But in super important for us as a company is the play confirming test of the Pantheon Basin floor fan complex. This play has never been effectively penetrated in reservoir facies in this area. The correlative section has been drilled through, but not recognized for what it actually is. The Pantheon Basin floor fan complex that we have in Talitha is a play confirming, and I'll argue a play opening test that quite seriously is likely to have the highest hydrocarbon pore volume at a play level of any play on the North Slope since the discovery of Prudhoe Bay. That it is that big. And it's been the focus of our leasing over the last 2 years. It's a spectacular outcome for us. We were hoping for some confirmatory data and information. What we got was spectacularly positively well above that. I'll close with a slide that actually talks to the wettability challenge, because it's a concept that and again, much of the confusion over what it is and what does it mean is likely due more to the fact that this term's misused. In fact, when people drill a well that has a low oil saturation, they'll call it water wet. And if they drill a well that has a high oil saturation, they call it oil wet. Well, that's that's misleading when we think about sort of the mechanics of wettability at the reservoir level. The lower left-hand picture shows two examples of what wettability does. The water wet on the left-hand side, the water spreads out across the glass surface. Oil wet on the other side, you see water beating up on the glass surface. On the right-hand side, it looks like three slides of potatoes. That's Roger's term for it. Man, they do look like potatoes. The water wet reservoir has water wrapping around the grains and oil occupying the central portion of the pore throats, so it flows freely through. In a mixed system, you've got a bit of both. On the right-hand side, what we believe is occurring at the Kuparuk level, we have an oil reservoir where oil wraps around, is the preferred phase, wrapping in contact with the sand grains in the reservoir, and then water occupies the central portion of the pore throats. This will change the way we drill and complete our wells in the future. So you can rest assured that these data and information, as we've learned about, is going to be incorporated into future planning, and will advance this fantastic project forward. Thanks for your time.
I'd like to just before we go to the next slide, I'd just like to say a couple of things. And first and foremost was in the planning of the well, we and particularly here on the North Slope, you never know how long you have in terms of the window to operate. So and we were recognized that we had multiple targets, and we'd like to, test everything and, collect as much information as we can. Ed came to me last December, or probably late November, and said, look, if we get into a situation where we run out of time, here's an idea in terms of collecting data that will advance the program and, give us a lot of the information if we can't test. I personally hadn't done this before. Ed, if you're still on the phone, I believe Mike Smith developed this technology for Exxon when he was at Exxon Research. But did he also, that's right, because it was Amoco. But I thought he also worked at Exxon Research for a while.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Exxon bought the technology, bought the intellectual property rights to the technology in the mid 90s, and then Mike consulted with Exxon. And the lab that Mike built for Exxon is still operating in their Spring, Texas. That's just north of Houston, technical headquarters. And then left Exxon and basically reinvented the methodology with the cryotrap, the very super cold liquid nitrogen based cryotrap innovation, and relaunched his company, and that's where we are today. So we're super lucky to have found it.
Yeah, and so this data was, we did not know what was going to come out of this. We did not, again, he makes it very clear that, he wanted to, collect the data. He actually had to train the people up in Alaska on how do you collect the data, and make his predictions and do his analysis completely independent of us. So, I think today, we've totally released his report. As Ed said, it's confirmatory of a lot of the things we were seeing, but more important is, we have now seen that we have these light hydrocarbons throughout this column, and, it's just been a fantastic piece of work for us. I mean, I cannot, overstate it, what it's been able to do and how it's helped us. anyways, I'll let you pass that on now.
Okay, so it's back to me. Just to restate the Kuparuk situation with the wettability.
I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you. I'm sorry, I'm
Sure.
going to interrupt you one time there, because there's one important part to this, and just want to emphasize that above the Decker D, we had samples. So it's not, we had a lot of sampling above the Decker D, and all of those samples were water wet. In other words, they did not
Don't
extract.
say water wet, Bob. We just heard all about that.
Yeah.
Filled with water.
Filled with water. Exactly. So it's not like, oh, it's just you're in Alaska and every time you take a cutting, you're going to find hydrocarbons in it. Until we hit I had always identified as the regional top seal, all those cuttings, they did not extract any hydrocarbons out of it. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Roger.
Great. Okay, so these zones are water wet, but they're filled with water also. And once you get below the Decker D, they remain water wet, but they're filled with oil in between the grains of potatoes. But once you get through this section, the rocks turn to oil wet. They contain a lot of oil, but they also have water in between the pieces of all the potatoes. So let's continue on. Whoops, this is the button for that. We're going to move up now from the Kuparuk to the awesome basin floor fan. Here's a log analysis of the 600 feet of the basin floor fan section. Now what you notice here is that the logs are going back and forth a real lot. Well, this is because it's very laminated rock. This was absolutely known ahead of time. This is what Ed and Bob predicted to be here. And this is what we have. Now, when we're doing the log analysis, we use logs, the conventional logs, neutron density, sonic, resistivity, gamma ray. And these logs only have a 2-foot resolution. But as I'm going to show you, we're looking at rocks that are on the order of 1 inch thick or centimeter thick, not 2 feet. So what do the logs do when the rocks are changing every centimeter? So the log analysis through here is very much of a smear. Even though it looks like a lot of things going on, it's very much of a smear through the rocks. So as a result, what we did was we ran Schlumberger's tool. It was called an FMS, and it allows us to get an image of the borehole 360 degrees around the borehole and all the way up and down. So just to emphasize the different scales that we're dealing with when we're looking at all this data, here's seismic data. Here's the basin floor fan, 600 feet from here to here. If we just looked at 200 feet of that section, here's the 600 feet, well, from here to here, here's the 600 feet of basin floor fan on the logs. If we just took 200 feet from here to here of that section and blow it up using the FMS, here, this is what you get. So what you're seeing is sand shale, sand shale, sand shale. Now the sands are the yellows. The shales are the browns. More specifically, the sands that are yellows are sands with oil in. If we continue blowing up this section, this 25 feet, now we're looking at 25 feet across from here to here. Let's change the color. I want a different color. I don't want black anymore. I want green. See, because of this great stuff, we can do all this. All right, so this is 20 feet. In fact, what's so cool here, this is a location that we took a sidewall core. That's 2 inches from here to here. So the yellows are where the sands are with oil. The browns are where the shales are. What you see here is more sand than there is shale. We originally predicted to be about 50-50 or sand or shale. We have more sand than shale, highly laminated, and thicker than we thought. Just to reference the scale again, this is a gamma ray log. See the character of this? It's just smearing through all this. It doesn't see at all what's going on here. This gamma ray log is just a smear. All the rest of our logs are just a smear of all these zones. But in reality, we've got something really, really special here. Let's compare that to the seismic. Here is the pipeline well here. We drilled up dip of pipeline. Here's the upper basin floor, although the basin floor fan, the theta west basin floor fan in that zone. When you map out the very top sand package, you end up with this map here. Talitha here, pipeline sitting over here, and that's the map that you created. Just looking at the very top package sitting right underneath here. If we looked at this in 3D, what you see is that map sticking out of the plane and the seismic section across here. Pipeline's not in this. This is a prediction of what was going on at Talitha. As you go up dip, you'll notice this area here where it gets real red. That's the sweet spot. That's this zone here. And if we look at that zone, that is here where it gets thicker, more up dip, it's shallower, it'll be better quality rock, and it is 6 miles closer to the sediment source when all the sediment came down here and dumped all the rock there. So we'd expect improved conditions up here and thicker. Bob?
So this is theta west, right? We call it the basin floor fan. It's theta west, and this outline that you're looking at here, and I'm going to turn on my little graphics. That fellow is the outline of the basin floor fan that Roger was just talking about. We call it theta west, and what you're looking at is the fan, and in these blocks are what we picked up in 2019, and this is what we went for in the last lease sale, right through here. The outline of that is 120,000 acres, and we've got over 80% of this play. There's the pipeline, there's the road. We are right next to the road. So if we go to the next slide, again, following on Roger's presentation, we have the amplitude anomaly associated with the theta west fan. Talitha was drilled bang right there. We are 1,500 feet down dip from the crest of the structure, but at Talitha, and as I'd say, the first real test of this fan at Talitha, even recognizing we were way off the optimum location, we intersected 600 feet section, all of it with light oil. This is a spectacular play. As you go up dip, we get thicker right here. Put my little marker, bang. That's over 1,000 feet thick and 1,000 feet up dip. The hydrocarbon pore volume in this is going to be spectacular. Go to the next slide, and I wanted to show you. Sorry, I've lost a slide. Anyways, I'm not sure where the slide 29 went, but doesn't matter. In here, in this area, in here that we also have this shallow zone, which is part of the theta west fan that was intersected right here in Talitha. And when we drilled the well, we did not put this in as one of our predicted zones to have hydrocarbons in it, but the guys at AHS have put that in as hydrocarbon bearing and one of their target intervals. Now, we always saw this down in here or up there, but it wasn't one of the intervals that was kind of popped up for us as going to be a major target. What that has done is, again, we can get 1,000 feet up dip and into the core of this part of the fan complex, which actually sits right in here. Now, something very important for everybody to know We've been talking about theta west and the basin floor fan for a long time. Obviously, we haven't wanted to discuss this in great detail because of the lease sale that was supposed to be in November of last year, and it actually occurred in January. And, you know, we picked up the acreage. We will give a resource update on the theta west basin floor fan within a month. That's a promise. That's what we're going to do. And I'm telling, you know, I'm putting it out there right now. It is going to be, as Ed said, it's probably going to be one of the largest resource plays on the North Slope, if not the largest. Go to the next slide. I think it's over to you, Roger.
All right, Bob, thanks. We're going to move up to the shelf margin deltaics now. The first thing, I'm going to show you what happened in that and where we were right and where we were wrong. To be able to show you all this, what was required and the fix to all this, what's required is really a superior data set. That was my number one priority of this well, is to get a really good set of data so we can calibrate it to the seismic so that the seismic can tell us petrophysically what's going on. And without that, with just the pipeline well, we can't even get a farming partner, but now we can. So here's the shelf margin deltaic system. These three sands in the uppermost part of the pay section. We predicted there to be a sand here. We predicted there'd be a sand here, these two guys. But what happened was we were also predicting that this shaly interval here, where all the green is, was going to be a better quality sand. It turned out to be a shaly zone. The zone down here, where it's getting sandier, I was predicting that to be shaly. So I kind of got these two things backwards. But this guy, that worked out. So how's that make sense? How do you get it right sometimes and wrong sometimes? Well, I'm going to show you that. Because of this great data set, we can show you that. Now, rocks are anisotropic. What that means is, because of the very layered nature of rocks, is that the velocity, and that's what seismic is all about, is the velocity of sound. The velocity of sound is slower going this direction than it is going this direction because of the layering. Because of that anisotropic change, we need to have an idea of how much it's slower or faster or whatever it is than the normal way. You see, well logs only measure their properties going up and down because that's the way the well's drilled. If it's a vertical well, and that's where we get all of our data from, we only measure the properties going up and down. Seismic data has measurements going at all different angles. So you see the disconnect. If we want to tie the two together, we need to know what happens at all the different angles. And we don't measure that from the logs. So what we do with seismic data is we need to understand, whoa, there is a lot of different changes in pictures. Okay. We need to understand where seismic and the well logs intersect so that we can use seismic to predict what the rock properties are. Before we had the Talitha well, we were predicting that this circle here is where the sands would fall in AVO crossplot space. Turns out that's not where they fell. Here's the same in the after Talitha well. This is where we thought the sands were going to fall. In reality, they're up where the black circle is. Now there's some overlap in between those two zones. That's where we were right anyway. But there's also sections that aren't overlapping. This section here and this section here, one's very different from each other. And that's what happened in this well. Now, because of the superior calibration we have, we can take the seismic data, we can convert it into a lithology data set, take the horizons that we want to look at, map them out, and come out with maps that look something like this. So this is the map of the section here in the shelf margin deltaics, and what you see is right here. Here's the pipeline well, but here's Talitha. Talitha went a little bit too far, and it got off the edge of it and ended up worse. That's what's going on here. But what did happen that was really neat, once we get this calibrated, this whole area opens up. In fact, this whole deltaic system wraps all the way around what we call the funnel, all the way around to Alkaid, sitting right there. Alkaid has oil in this zone. This is not the Alkaid pay section. This is a shallower section in Alkaid that we always knew had oil in it, but now it's wrapped all the way around and it's connected to this lobe up here. So just to emphasize that a little bit more, this map here is our old map, pre-Talitha map of what this deltaics would look like. For your reference, here's the road and the pipeline. Actually, the road here and the pipeline here. That's before, that's after. So before and after. Here's pipeline, here's Talitha, here's the whole outline of the new accumulation and the infrastructure. Really, really a cool outcome. Bob?
So this is another picture, another presentation of that map. And significantly, and you can see, on the right here, that's kind of where we were pre-Talitha. Hooking up this through here is very important to us. As Roger's alluded, we have the road, which is moving down through here. We can appraise this now with a well at Alkaid and testing the Alkaid anomaly, which is below this, and testing the shelf margin deltaic from the road. So pre-drill, at the lease sale, we actually picked up acreage over here. We now have the shelf margin deltaic completely wrapping around and intersecting and going underneath the road. For us, in terms of our ability to execute an appraisal and development of this, it's unique. Again, we're in a unique position because of location. But also important, I'm going to show you just a seismic line that kind of shows you the relationship between pipeline, which is here, Talitha, which is here. This is a flattened seismic line, and Alkaid. And again, this is our regional top seal across the top here. And we have oil just below the regional top seal at Alkaid. The Alkaid anomaly is down here. We have oil below the regional top seal at Talitha and at Pipeline State. All of this is now hooked up into one system. When we do a resource upgrade of this, resource assessment, there will be a resource upgrade on the shelf margin deltaic, even though we had some disappointment in the Talitha well, because we can now see that this is all hooked up as one system. So for us, it's a very, very positive outcome in terms of being able to appraise and possibly develop this at the same time as we're doing the Alkaid test down in here. So I don't know how to, we tried to think of different ways of how to kind of end the presentation. We started this in the log analysis and in the where we were back in October, we had 2,000 feet of hydrocarbons. We have an excellent, unique set of data and an independent set of data that says we have 3,700 feet of hydrocarbons in this borehole. So I think with that, I'll just go over the, Jay, do you want to go through this?
Sure. A little bit back on the Kuparuk. It was oil wet. We'll treat it differently. But what we didn't actually talk about is the Kuparuk at the Talitha A location is between 800 and 1,000 feet down dip from the crest, the top of the Kuparuk formation. As Roger said, as you go closer to your source rock, you get better rock. We also know as you go up dip, your oil percentage goes up. So the Kuparuk can only get better for us going up dip from the Talitha location. We also know that next time we will treat it differently, knowing that it is an oil-rich reservoir. So it is very much still a target with significant potential. Bob's promised a resource upgrade. This thing is huge. Ed said it is the largest hydrocarbon pore volume, maybe outside of just the Prudhoe Bay field. When you talk about 5 stacked horizons, potentially productive zones with the sort of aerial extent that we have shown you today, it is simply tremendous. There's nothing like it that I've ever seen. The Talitha wellbore is in excellent condition, and it's going to be ready for testing next season. Mike and his team did an incredible job in drilling that well. We drilled it for a third less. Obviously, our problems started when we attempted to do the open hole test, and that didn't go to plan. And we've got so much data that we will be mulling over in the coming months. So that kind of sums it up. And I guess we're going to go to Q&A now. Is that right?
That's right. Jay, look, thanks very much. It's Justin here. I've got about sort of 50-odd questions in front of me, and I've had a bunch of questions sort of flying in throughout the course of the presentation. I'll whiz through. I think I can group them. A lot of them are reasonably similar, but let's get into them in no particular order, because I think there's some really good questions there. So the first one, we've previously spoken about this prove up and sell strategy, and the question, that's been asked is, following the result at Kuparuk, and I guess, following the share price reaction we had yesterday to that news, which, wasn't received well, and we as a company perhaps felt it was misunderstood, but, we would say that. The question is, has that strategy changed? Jay, did you have a view on that?
Well, no, that's always been our strategy. It's still our strategy. We're a small company with a huge acreage position, but the ultimate goal is to prove it up and sell it on. It's much easier for bigger companies to make money the old-fashioned way by drilling and there are literally hundreds and hundreds of wells that, if we're correct, would be drilled in this, if not thousands, in this area.
And Jay, this is a theme that comes up time and time again. It'll weave its way through some of the questions that we have coming up about funding and farm out discussions and so on. And the answer is that we're at a different stage of the typical project life cycle. We're at an earlier stage. We believe we can get enormous leverage in proving this play up, and then we pass it on to a bigger company who will apply the capital that we won't have to really generate an IRR out of it. But we think we can generate enormous returns out of that. And in the world, it's changed a lot. This is another question here actually that comes up, and that was that last year you said you were looking for farm out and you didn't have any success. Why do you think you'd be more confident this year? And the answer is we haven't begun the process yet this year. But what we can say is that things have changed significantly. Last year we had a $30 oil price. This year it's over 60. Last year we were in COVID. This year the economy's rebounding and stock markets are rebounding. Companies are spending money again and not shedding projects. But more important than that, I think the more relevant, And you can look to the US to what's happening in terms of the oil and gas market. And that is that there is a focus on these larger conventional projects with running room. The shales that had been so topical for the last 10 or more years, they're fading away. They're getting less capital applied to them. And there's an attraction towards other projects with scale. Now, it's our job to prove it to the bigger companies to come in and make an acquisition. And to prove it, we need to generate data and we need to get well results and those kinds of things. And that's what we're doing. So in terms of the question, does the prove up and sell strategy still apply? Absolutely, it applies. We won't sell it for less than what we think it's worth, of course, but we will be there to try and pick the right time in the cycle to make sure that we get a good exit. The next question, we've touched upon this a bit, but I think it's worth highlighting, and that's a question on acreage. Bob, you showed an excellent slide before showing particularly our Theta West project, and I've noticed a couple of questions coming in referring to some of our old project names. There is a little bit of nomenclature confusion, and we'll do our best to sort of to tidy that up. At the moment, I think we classify our projects into 3 or 4 main projects. There's Talitha, there's Theta West, there's Alkaid, previously called Alkaid Fector, and there's the new one called Leonis. Everything fits under the umbrella of those 4 projects at the moment. But one of the questions that has come up is, why have we not heard so much about Theta West? Why is it emerging now? Jay touched upon it and Bob touched upon it, and I'm going to highlight the point again because it's very important. Our technical team have been working on that for a long, long time. They identified what they thought, what you saw on some of those slides, is tremendous upside. We had to keep that stum until we could acquire that acreage. When COVID came, the lease sales got pushed back from November to December to January. We had to keep quiet. In the farm out room, we can't expose those positions to people that won't sign, or to companies or entities that won't sign a non-compete clause, because otherwise we'll find ourselves in a bidding war at the auctions, at the lease auctions. So we had to keep strategically quiet. We've now got the acreage position we need. We can be loud and proud. We can show what we've got in the data room, but also we can speak to investors with much more candor and openness about what we believe we have. Next question, off topic, but it's an important one. Does Pantheon have any plans to consider a dual listing on other markets to improve liquidity? I'll answer this one, and I'll pass some of the others on to some of the other guys. Look, we've observed what's happened with other companies with dual listings. What I would say to you is it's not our style to jump onto one of those things just for early liquidity. We want to form a long-term view as to whether or not they really make sense for the company. A lot of these dual listings have been backed up by social media marketing campaigns, those kinds of things. That's not what we're about. We want to build a proper company, develop the assets, and attract quality investors. So we will observe closely. If we think it's the right thing to do, we will, but there's no current plans. Next question is the obvious one: cash balance. You spent some money on this well. How are you funded? Look, we haven't disclosed our numbers, but what I can tell you is we raised $30 million before the well. The well cost about 20. You can do the math on the balance. So we don't have enough to drill a new big well. We haven't yet formed a view on what it would cost to come back and recomplete, or to come back and test the Talitha, for example, but those numbers are going to be significantly lower because the well is already in good condition and cased. We just need to go back with a small rig and do testing. So, it's low. It's one of the things we've always got to keep an eye on. We're always balancing with an eye on dilution. But it's not something we need to be worried about today. Next question: has Pantheon recommenced farm out negotiations? I think we touched upon that. Not yet. We're still finishing this well, but the doors will be open pretty soon to try and attract a high quality partner. Alkaid can be drilled in the summer months, or in fact, realistically, probably autumn, if we had a partner coming in. And we've got, the other project, the other data that you've just seen. Jay mentioned we only received some of that on Thursday night, US time. So we're still putting that package of information together. There's a question here on location, and perhaps I might put that across to Bob or to Ed. And that is, somebody's asked a question. We keep banging on about why it's so advantageous for us to be near the highway and the pipeline, but how much of an advantage is it really? Could you perhaps answer that, Bob or Ed?
I'll let Ed answer that one. I mean, he's been thinking about this for even longer than I have.
I think it's fair to say the position of the leasehold from the very beginnings of Great Bear was focused on access to infrastructure, and not just the road, but also the pipeline. The Trans-Alaska Pipeline has a throughput capacity of around 2 million barrels per day. Right now, it's flowing at about 500,000. Tremendously underutilized capacity, and that provides us. And it's a federally regulated pipeline. It's open access. All we have to do is satisfy the quality criteria for oil to be put into the pipeline, and we can build our own pump station to access taps. And from the data that we've gained from both Alkaid and from Talitha, we have really the highest quality oil on the North Slope, frankly, in my opinion, from a geochemical perspective. The business isn't really an advantage. Of course it is. And the reason why is the drilling is a complex enterprise. It's a complex undertaking. It requires real-time access to provisioning, resupplying during normal operations. And when things don't go well, you want to have access to additional supply routes. And in this part of the world, the supply center for all activity on the North Slope is Prudhoe Bay, a small town called Deadhorse, where there's an airport and all of the major service infrastructure is centered around their warehouses and manufacturing facilities. The further you are away from that location, the further you are away from road infrastructure that allows access to that location, the worse off you are. And the bottom line is our contiguous acreage position on the highway and the pipeline is a strategic advantage that no one else on the slope that is trying to build position and production has. And that includes Conoco to the west in the NPRA. It certainly includes Kalis, which is way far to the west in shallow water. And it also very clearly impacts some of the other small explorers in the area that have been drilling recently. The further you are away, the worse off you are across a number of very critical aspects of operational execution.
I'd also
don't run away.
Wait a second. I would also add is importantly, and for us, is we will not have to move any oil through other companies' infrastructure. So, if you're these guys, here, if you're Armstrong and Repsol, you will be moving your oil through the Kuparuk, the Conoco Kuparuk facilities. And we don't have to do that. So we're not negotiating with people to access their facilities. We can directly hook up into the pipeline. I mean, it's just massive for us. That has inhibited people, new players coming to the North Slope for years in terms of, getting access into facilities and the cost of it.
Yeah, that's
what you're saying, Bobby, is that
the length of our pipeline to get to taps at Alkaid, it's going to be, we'll be right on top of it. Parts of Talitha will be right on top of it. Other parts, we might have to have an 8 or 10 mile export, but certainly not a 50 or 60 or more mile export to get to infrastructure or to taps.
Jay, if you can just stay there, you've led into another question about drilling pads near the highway and so on and so forth. But before I ask that question, I just want to finish off a point that Ed had raised about the quality of our light oil. There was a specific question, and that was whether our oil can be blended with other oil in the pipeline, i.e., is there a demand for oil like ours in that pipeline?
Absolutely, Justin, and it's a great question. Much of the crude oil produced on the North Slope in Prudhoe Bay and the Kuparuk field is actually relatively viscous. It's thicker than our oil. If you looked at if you had a vial or a jar of Kuparuk crude, it would look similar in viscosity to traditional motor oil. Definitely liquid, but thick. Our oil at mid 30s to 42 API, whether it's alkane in mid 30s or 42 at Talitha, has the consistency of diesel fuel or even water. Highly viscous, and it becomes a valued what's called a diluent or a blending agent to facilitate higher flow rates of the existing oils at Prudhoe and Kuparuk. So there is an embedded internal market on the North Slope for higher quality crudes like ours to facilitate additional production from the legacy fields.
Thanks, Ed. Now, Jay, just back to you for a second, Jay. I've got a couple of questions. The first is, there's been some discussion in the press, about oil and in national land versus state land, and there's some misunderstanding and some general confusion. Could you just explain where Pantheon's acreage sits on the North Slope in relation to state versus federal land?
Yeah, well, we were 100% on Alaskan state lands. Hold on, something just happened, but I can't see the slide any longer, but can you guys hear me? Hello?
Yes, I can, Jay. I can hear you.
Okay.
You want to put the slide back?
So we're 100% on state land. The Alkane unit actually has an 8th royalty. Most of the Talitha unit has a 6th royalty, but we are in some of the lowest tax royalty schemes throughout the entire world, and that's good for us. We're not in the NPRA or ANWR. We don't have to deal with the federal government. As Ed said, TAPS is an open access pipeline. So as long as we have crude that is, consistent with what's necessary to get into the pipeline, we can get into the pipipeline. So that's not an issue.
Okay.
Jay,
Bob, a question for you. Oh, sorry.
There's another important point here that our position is fairly unique, actually. Obviously, being on state acreage where there's a single mineral holder, the title is relatively simple. But the other thing too, on the North Slope, because the operators of North Slope play in the nexus between federal, state, and indigenous peoples regulatory oversight. Oftentimes that nexus is difficult ground. Always being aware and being conscious of doing the right thing. The more complicated the discussion, the more difficult the negotiations can be. In our particular area, there are no native Alaskan villages. It's also an area that is not utilized from a subsistence use perspective by the indigenous people. The eastern portion of our acreage position is dominated by what's called the transportation corridor, an area that has been heavily used for decades now, which again opens up more freedom for us. Obviously, still within the regulatory oversight of the state and the federal government, but it provides us more access. I think that the advantages of where we are so multifaceted, they really can't be overemphasized.
Thanks, Ed. Look, guys, there's a question that relates to the news yesterday. Jay mentioned at the beginning of this presentation that we were disappointed with our experience in the Kuparuk, and we were. Let's not beat around the bush. We were hoping to, have higher flow rates and so on, but we've learnt a lot of information, which makes it very different for us going forward. But to put that in perspective, I've got a note here. We dropped 50% of our market cap yesterday. We lost $175 million of value for a well that cost $20 million. You've just seen some slides which have shown you 3,700 feet of stacked hydrocarbon column. Ed mentioned that every single sample that was taken by AHS showed oil. You heard in the presentation that we've de-risked the play and we've increased our confidence in the play. Yes, there's still some things to work out with the Kuparuk. The news is coming through. It's oil wet. We know how to do that differently. Framing that, the question was, do we still have confidence or belief that the Kuparuk could be a productive play, or there's resource potential on our field, or is the Kuparuk dead? Bearing in mind we still have the 4 shallower zones to go for. Bob?
Well, yeah, the Kuparuk is very much in play, especially since we've got 800 to 1,000 feet that we can go up dip. And there, as we mentioned, there are specialist firms that do oil wet reservoirs, and so we will certainly engage before we drill another well in the Kuparuk. Had we had more time, I would have liked to have tried to treat Talitha with a relative permeability modifier, which is one of the things that you try in oil wettability reservoirs. We simply didn't have the time.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that. We've got light oil. It's a good reservoir, light oil. We can get up dip, and it's a huge volume. It's a huge volume. But Justin, you're right. We have to say we're not happy at all. We wanted to deliver, a big test result. But the hydrocarbons, are kicking around there.
Thanks, Bob. Look, I've got a couple more questions. There's been a few questions about, we've had some TR1, some substantial shareholder selling notices coming through. Look, and there's been some questions about that. Look, we're not in a position, we're not able to discuss, the selling detail for a shareholder. It's just not in our realm to do that. There's been a fair bit of volume that has gone through, selling volume over the last few months. That's clear for everybody to see. But we just can't discuss that. Another question, Jay, I touched upon before was summer drilling versus winter drilling. We've often said at the Alkaid project that an advantage is that you can do operations during the summer, or the non-winter months is probably more specific. There's a number of advantages of that. Would you mind just expanding on exactly what those advantages may look like, and if that does that give an NPV benefit, or is there what is the benefit to the company of that?
Yeah, Michael, if you're on, you might be better. I can do it, but you know it intimately. A summer or a non-winter well versus a winter well.
Well, why don't you do it, Jay?
Michael's on. Okay.
I can handle that.
Go ahead.
If you want me to,
because
no, that's all right.
We drilled Alcor and Merak just to the northeast of Alkaid in the summer of 2012. 2 stack test wells that gathered a tremendous amount of information for the company across a broad range of targets, including the shelf margin deltaic section and the Alkaid, the seismic anomaly, which is the original Alkaid target. I can tell you firsthand that operating in the summer, which is a huge benefit of being on the highway, provides you an opportunity to negotiate much more aggressively with service providers, not just the rig drilling companies, but all the other services in your supply chain, because it's a unique type of activity outside of Prudhoe, Kuparuk, and Alpine Field, where there's a lot of surface infrastructure. It the other and very, very obvious benefit, having been in North Alaska both in the summer and the winter for various reasons, you're drilling in generally non-freezing weather. It's also daylight, virtually 24 hours a day, and that just makes operations easier. It's safer. You have much less trouble navigating or resupplying yourself from Prudhoe. Coming down the highway to your location is pretty much a non-event. The cost benefit's really the big one. You have substantially more leverage in negotiating rig rates and rates for other services. That was a huge one for us back in 2012, and it'll be a huge one for us this coming season.
I would just
add the time it takes to do things in the winter are expanded greatly. I mean, you can imagine at its worst this past winter, the wind chill at our location got down to minus 59 degrees centigrade. Now, when it's that cold, people don't want to be outside. Your lines freeze up. You know, when we did the frac, and the frac was done at a relatively benign temperature, had to move all of the frac equipment off of the pad, take it into Dead Horse, and warm it up, and then move it back. So you can imagine the time saving, and you just think of all the things you have to do: moving pipe around, moving fluids around, moving equipment is so much easier in the non-winter months than in the winter months. So
that's all true.
It's a huge advantage.
Fortunately, in North Alaska, having done wells in the winter and the summer, I mean the industry has built the capability, both from a logistical perspective, operational capability of operating in any kind of weather condition, which is extraordinary. It's a fascinating place to see, to experience, but weather is not going to stop us from doing something. It may slow us down from time to time, but it won't stop us.
So I think one other very important point in terms of the summer and our ability to drill along the haul road is we can do something that no one else can do, which is have these long-term production tests. So that's a massive advantage in terms of being able to ultimately design your infrastructure, get your costs handled, and before you go out and spend this massive amount of money. So all the people to the west of us, are designing, building infrastructure before they could ever have a long-term production test. And anybody in the industry, knows anything about the industry, would desperately like to have a long-term production test on your reservoirs before you build your infrastructure.
Bob, thank you. A couple of more good questions have just come through. One is just circling back to this point about institutional representation on the share register and the selling that we'd seen. The question is, would we try and proactively do anything to help assist with any to get rid of any or to alleviate any overhang of stock? And the answer is absolutely we would. Earlier this year we graduated from a smaller broker to Canaccord. We specifically chose Canaccord because they've got an exceptional expertise in not only junior companies but natural resources companies, and they have a established franchise in the US. So a natural place for us to go and attract institutional investment is in the US. We've done very little of it so far, but certainly we'll be doing that going forward. And again, it doesn't take much interest from an institutional to sort out any overhang of stock. It's called a block trade. It's done every day of the week in equity markets by the institutional brokers, and that's something that we would certainly look to do. That was one question. Slightly going back to the Kuparuk, the question is, we spoke about this concept of being oil wet. We didn't know that at the time. Jay, I think, mentioned that for oil wet reservoirs, you use different products and you drill about it differently. The question is, if we had known that information beforehand, would we have drilled the Kuparuk differently, and would we have expected the outcome to be different? Jay or Bob?
Well, yeah, obviously we would have treated it differently, and we would expect the outcome to be different. Obvious, yes.
Okay. Another question.
Well, yeah,
here,
let me just go back, because we were, we were all surprised that we were not seeing the kind of flow rates that we anticipated. Roger and Ed both showed you the Kuparuk logs. That was a big, thick, blocky sand. It didn't have, that chatter that Roger talked about, being laminated. It wasn't laminated at all. It was one thick sand. And it's among Kuparuk logs. And I talked to the tool pusher, on the Nordic rig one morning. We were having coffee, and he said, I've drilled dozens of wells in the Kuparuk, and this is one of the best logs I've seen. So we were all surprised at the flow, that we didn't get the kind of flow rates we were anticipating. The water wettability obviously impacted it.
Okay, we're getting towards the end of, Jay, I think we're getting reasonably towards the end of the questions. There is one or two goodies yet to come. Somebody's with laser focus asked us a question on funding again. What would our preferred method of funding be for the company? And I think the answer is all options are open. Look, this is a bugbear of mine. I get this question all the time. The AIM market in particular and other junior markets are frightened of equity raisings. Look, we've never, ever done a deeply discounted equity raising. We always take the route that is the lowest dilution for the company. Last November, we raised $30 million. It came at, I think it was about 15 or 16% dilution from memory to the company in equity value, and it allowed us to maintain 100% working interest in this play. And you guys saw what we can see in terms of the size of that play, in the emergence into this new Theta West project and so on and so forth. We've always done the right thing. So the answer is we will speak to farm out companies. We'll chase terms that we think are right, a partner that suits us, that matches our criteria, not just any partner. It's not just a checkbook. We can get money. It's about getting the right money and the right partner. So look, trust us. We're all equity holders. Every single person here, the Great Bear guys, because of, through no fault of their own, there was a situation you're all aware of. So they're all carrying costs at much higher prices than all of us. Everybody is aligned in their interests to make this thing work. We believe in it. People can be cynical. We get that. That's fine. But we will push ahead and do our very best. The leverage is enormous, and that is the plan. One last question I think is probably a good time to wrap it up. And that is, what type of news flow can we expect going forward? Bob, you mentioned that we're going to quickly finish off this well, and then get to work on upgrading our resources for various projects. So there's a resource upgrade coming in the first instance, I think you mentioned, in Theta West. Will there be resource estimates to come following that? Will there be a sequence or a conveyor belt of other resource estimates and other work to come, Bob?
Yes, definitely. Again, Theta West within a month. We'll then, we're obviously updating the shelf margin deltaic. We're kind of furiously don't expect that like in a month's time or 2 months' time. Yeah, that's going to take us time to get that done. And we've got, a couple of new reservoir intervals that were unexpected that will take us some time to put it all together. So yes, we will be doing that, as well as, starting up the farm out process and getting that up and running. Look, I'm going to add something here. At the end of all this, we've been bombarded with a huge amount of data over the last 2 weeks. We've been bombarded with a lot of data over the last month, which is, fantastic. But, over the last couple of weeks, particularly with this volatile analysis, we got our first report late last week. And, we've got to integrate all of that data into understanding how do we move forward in terms of the best way to test each of these different formations that we believe we've got hydrocarbons in. And we've got substantial amount of evidence that these are light hydrocarbons in these reservoirs. And how we test that is, that's going to take us a lot of work to do that, and also detail evaluate what we've got in the Kuparuk. So, we've got a big program for a very, very, very small team to get done. But like I said, number one, we will get a resource update on Theta West. We will work on the resource update on the shelf margin deltaic, which will come after Theta West, and we will get the update on our new targets out there as well.
And in addition to that, Bob, there'll be more interpretation and analysis of this well that will be coming through. Our intention
totally
is to be busy. Yeah. Look, I think what we did at the last webinar was I did a bit of a round the table chat with a few of you just to sort of get your views. And I think it's a really important thing. Before I do, one question has just come through. And the question was, had we known that the Kuparuk was oil wet, would we have waited and tested that one last? And I think it's important to address this.
You can't test it. Okay, very quickly, you have to work your way up from the bottom to the top. So that's just and Bob, there's no way around that really than to do that.
That's right. But so you've got to work from deepest to shallowest, Bob. If you drew a line on if you said, what, the Kuparuk's giving us grief, let's draw a line on it, go shallower, and can we come back later or not to a deeper horizon?
It's not. It isn't something you can normally do. No, it's not. Yeah. And the other point is, look, I've obviously been bombarded with questions over the last 24 hours, and Justin has, and all that kind of stuff. You're damned if you do and damned if you don't. In other words, we did not understand the results we were getting in the Kuparuk. If we had just stopped and said, okay, let's move up the hole, and we did the same thing, let's say in Theta West, and we started getting the same results, and we had found out, which is not the case, it is not the case, but we didn't know this till last Thursday about this oil wettability in the Kuparuk. We would have been, people would be saying, well, why didn't you figure out what's happening in the Kuparuk before you tested what's happening above? So it is only again last week, at the end of last week, that this data came in, and we think we have a handle now on what's happening in the Kuparuk and what's the proper way to do it. We also understand that everything above the Kuparuk is different than the Kuparuk, but we didn't know that 100% until last Thursday. So, I think we're doing the right thing, which is we have a well bore that's in good shape, and we have all this data, and we can evaluate that data and say, what are we going to do to properly test each one of these zones and give each one of these zones the proper sort of amount of time to test it, as opposed to kind of rushing in and testing.
Yeah. Understood. Thank you, Bob. Look, guys, I'm going to ask each of you a question as to what your conclusions are, if your views have changed on anything. And the reason this is important is because back in October, before we had spudded this well, when we last spoke, we had a hypothesis. We had a bunch of data. We had seismic. We had all the well information from the Pipeline State well, but we hadn't drilled the well ourselves. And now we have. And Roger showed you in great detail the very, very high quality data that we got, and how it's enabled us to reprocess all of the information that we have and calibrate it and get a very, very good assessment. So the overlying question is, having drilled this well, yes, we ultimately ran out of time. That was the great shame. We just ran out of time. We were unable to go out and do those shallower zones. But notwithstanding that, with the information that we've got, what are we thinking? Have our view, how do we feel about it? And I'm going to start first with Roger, if I may. Roger, how do you feel about it? You did a lot of the high-tech geophysics you've done a lot of the work during and post. What's your assessment? What's your high-level overview?
Well, last October, we had a well with very poor data, log data, the pipeline well, that intersected what we perceived to be numerous giant oil fields. A big statement for anybody to believe as we're trying to get the farm in. Now what we have is a new borehole with great log data. Everything ties together better and still intersecting numerous giant oil fields. In fact, Schlumberger even noted about the data. They said, without us asking them, they said, this is one of the best quality data sets we've seen in a long time. And that's the people that acquired the data. That's all because we have a gun barrel borehole and it's suitable conditions for getting that data. So we are well down the road in this project.
Look, Roger, thank you very much. And just a general thank you very much. A lot of people have commented that they really like your style. Reminds them of being back at school, but in a good way. So, Roger, thank you very, very much. And please, for those viewers that were here last time, Roger had a tropical storm and had to go kind of blind on a mobile telephone. So great to have you back at the controls, Roger. Jay, over to you. What's your, actually, I'll finish with you, Jay, as the CEO. Ed, what's your view?
Well, I in complete agreement with Roger. I think more the data from Talitha is obviously fantastic. Gives an incredible calibration. A project we haven't talked about, but is ongoing, is we're improving the data set at Alkaid in general. So we're going to see that project actually come into clearer focus for us too, in the broader context of our activity set moving forward. But I am convinced in looking at the data that we have from Talitha, and frankly, I'm still amazed in a very positive way. The results of the volatiles analysis, I think, is pointing us at a project that actually has a larger hydrocarbon pore volume than what we started with. Rearranged slightly at the shelf margin deltaic level, but much, much better in the basin floor fan setting. I think, aside from the challenges of the testing of the Kuparuk and other zones that we didn't get to, I think the result is fantastic and points to an amazing future.
Thanks, Ed. And Bob, we have heard a bit from you. Any sort of final comforting words for the crowd?
No, I think Roger and Ed summed up kind of my view. I think we've got the beyond a doubt, in terms of hydrocarbons, over in terms of the acreage position we have, the hydrocarbon pore volume over our acreage is just enormous, and it's sitting right next to the haul road. We just keep coming back to it. We've got billions and billions of barrels of oil in place, substantially, probably more than I've just said. We believe we've got 1 billion barrels recoverable. That's what we think. And it's sitting right next to the haul road. And we have a fantastic set of data.
Bob, thank you. And technical team, thank you very much for your help this evening. Jay, final words from the CEO. Any final points you wanted to remind people of?
Yeah, I would just say we can drill 2 of our projects from the Dalton Highway, Alkaid, and in 2 places on the shelf margin deltaic. That gives us an advantage. Bob talked about, Ed talked about, no one else on the North Slope has. You couple that with the, if not hundreds of millions, billions of barrels of recoverable, and it's an amazing project, truly world class.
Look, Jay, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Look, thanks very much for sticking with us. Thank you for attending today. The guys at Share Talk told us that they had a record attendance level during this call, which is great. Look, we're not happy about the share price performance yesterday. It's not our job to comment on that, but we hope that from this presentation, you've seen that there's a whole lot more to the story than the headline that I think that really caught the eye yesterday. It is really, really difficult drafting an RNS, particularly when you've got a little bit of disappointing news in there. You try and give as much information as you can. You're acting in real time. We're not a company. I hope you all know us by now. There has never been a leak in this company's history. I'm proud of that. We just don't do that. But we're acting on information when it's live. You know, the stock exchange rules say that material information must be reported without delay, and that without delay is it's tricky. We'd all love to have 24 or 48 hours to get our thoughts together and really consolidate our thinking. We need to put these things together pretty quickly. We try to be as balanced as we can. We don't try and exaggerate and those kinds of. That's not our style. We try and deliver it as it is. Yesterday, was the stock market is treating bad news or disappointing news brutally at the moment. We all know that. But anyway, we hope we had a chance to present to you really as candidly as we can. We've opened everything to you today to let you know where we're at. And we think we've got a really exciting future ahead. There'll be ups and downs. There always is, but the story is incredible. So thank you, everybody. And this will be available on our website and on YouTube in a day or two. As soon as it's made available to us, we'll make sure that it's been put on the relevant on the website and so on. So thank you very much, everybody, and over and out.